Welcome to this module, a part of the Cisco Collaboration Software as a Service authorization for Cisco partners. In this section of the module, we will cover an overview of Webex Edge solution, the Webex Edge audio architecture, the Webex Edge Connect architecture, the Webex Edge video architecture, and additional resources for Webex Edge. Now, let's hear from Richard Murphy, a Cisco Technical Marketing Engineer for Webex Edge.
Cisco Webex Edge. If you look at the cloud landscape today, Edge and cloud are both really important to bring people together no matter where they are or what device they are using. But work is changing. The average person spends more than 37% of their time in meetings, and is showing on how voice usage in the enterprise is changing. 50% of all voice traffic ends up on a conference bridge. This is causing PSTN and internet bandwidth to increase. The cloud infrastructure has not kept up with the new technology, making it difficult for users to adopt voice over IP. In fact, 2 out of 3 people still use PSTN to dial into their meetings. And 3 out of 5 people still think that video from the cloud is not a reliable experience. We're here to change that. Cisco Webex, the global backbone of meeting infrastructure across the globe, has a 20 gigabit link between all sites, enabling audio and video traffic to actually be landed on those particular sites close to the region and provide a very good, high-quality experience for all users in all types of meetings. Now, with Cisco Webex Edge and the customer premise, we don't want to have islands. We want to actually bring those two together. So we want to bring the collaboration and real-time media of the Cisco Webex Edge with existing customer premise to make a unified solution with no change in user behavior. So what is Cisco Webex Edge? So Cisco Webex Edge is an umbrella marketing term that actually has 3 separate components inside of it. Webex Edge Audio, which is new, Webex Edge Connect, which is new, and Webex Edge Video Mesh, which has been out since November 2016, previously known as the Hybrid Media Service. All 3 of those components make up the Webex Edge product line. Now, each one of these 3 can be standalone products themselves on a customer environment. There is no dependency on any of the other ones. You could have 1, 2, or 3 of these different services in a customer environment. So let's start with Webex Edge Audio. So what is it? So on the left-hand side of this drawing, you see a simple diagram that shows an IP phone connecting out through the infrastructure into the Webex meeting. So we allow for intelligent audio routing from on-premise devices into the Webex meeting for audio communication. In addition, we say, okay, as part of this service, you now got the benefit of using your existing infrastructure and also your existing internet connection to provide audio connectivity to the actual meeting itself, without the possibility of using PSTN connectivity. This is part of the Collaboration Flex plan, and there's no extra charge for it. In addition, there's no extra charges for this with the Expressway port licensing. All centers, such as Meeting Center, Event Center, and Training Center, are supported for this particular infrastructure. Now let's take a look briefly at some of the details and requirements for this. The left-hand side is a nice little simple diagram. What is required from, let's say, Communications Manager, which is 10.5 or later? From an Expressway standpoint, we need X8.10 or later as part of the deployment on each one of those expressways. We support G711 and G722 audio codecs going through in this particular environment. And from the Webex side, you must be at least on WS33.X or higher to make the solution work. So how does it work? So in these particular diagrams you'll see coming up, the signaling will be represented in yellow. The media path, which is basically the audio, will be represented in green. So it's the simplest process. First off, the phone itself dials the Webex access global access number itself. And then from there, Communication Manager receives a request. We've already put in a configuration that says, okay, if I match this request, send it across a trunk that we've created between Communications Manager and our Edge portfolio in the Expressway, send it through the Expressway, and then make sure the meeting can be reached. Now, when the media happens, when I want to actually speak to somebody, we want to make sure we hear their audio and they hear our audio, the path is very similar, except we do not use Communications Manager because it does not process the media. So it goes IP phone, to Expressway C, to Expressway E, to the meeting itself, and I'm now a participant from an audio perspective talking to all the other participants. So you may be saying to yourself, okay, so I'm starting to get WebEx Edge audio. What does it look like if I don't have it? So the left and right comparison of these two slides show you what it looks like with WebEx Edge audio on the left, and if I did not have it enabled, what it would look like on the right. So basically the main difference between the two of them is the media path. On the right-hand side, as you noticed in both of these diagrams, we actually send all the traffic out the PSTN gateway from the premise out to the PSTN into WebEx itself versus using our internet connectivity that we have already existing. This could potentially cost the customer charges basically for using the PSTN versus the internet, which we've already paid for, and we can actually use traffic going across it. So from a configuration step standpoint, let's take a look at it, a couple high-level steps to get an understanding of it. There's a complete deployment guide that you can actually use to reference for those that want to get into the technical details of how this is actually set up. But a couple things we need to do. Number one, we need to make sure that we have a DNS SRV record set up for the Expressway E so that when we do a callback scenario, because in this particular case, we can dial into the meeting, as we just showed earlier, or I can say, as you're familiar with on the WebEx meeting app, call me back at this number. And that would be a callback scenario. So the SRV record in this particular case is used for a callback scenario. And it needs to be set up properly so that WebEx can actually authenticate to the Expressway E and also figure out how do I actually find it for my organization. In addition, obviously, Communications Manager, Expressway C, and Expressway E need the capabilities to actually dial into the system, and we'll talk about dial out in just a second. So to do this, we've actually provided a Lua script, basically a script that can be placed inside a Communications Manager that changes the request URI and the to header to make sure it's in the proper format, so when a call comes from inside the network, it actually is in the proper format to be received by the WebEx meeting itself. So this is actually something you can download from the Control Hub itself, and it's installed directly on the SIP trunk that goes between the Communications Manager and the Expressway. Now, obviously, from a Communications Manager standpoint, we haven't done any changes here. It's the same Communications Manager that you know today that you've configured with many of your customers, and you have the expertise of the UC partner to actually manipulate and create the proper dial plan. Same with Expressway C and E. We're using the same flow between the two of them, basically traversal zones and search rules to make this path go through. In addition, we want to make sure the proper firewall ports are set up and we've applied the appropriate certificates so that we can actually validate ourselves against the WebEx infrastructure. So from a callback scenario, it's a little more complicated than what we have here. So the previous ones were all dial in, so the phone was actually going into the WebEx meeting. Now we want to say, okay, dial me back at this number. Now there's two options here. Obviously, we can dial out to the PSTN number or we can dial on-net number. So to do this, we have to authenticate the WebEx Edge like we talked about. the WebEx infrastructure to the Expressway E. We need to make sure that the SRV record set up and the communication is trusted between the two of them. Then we have to say, okay, Expressway E, send the traffic to Expressway C, and Expressway C, notify Communications Manager to make the decision of how to actually find the end result, whether it's on-net or off-net. Let's talk about a couple deployment scenarios. So what might be a typical deployment scenario? So this is a little bit complex, but we decided to actually show you what would be a multinational organization. On the left-hand side, we have WebEx Edge audio installed for a US component of it. The right-hand side, we have another office based in Germany. We've got WebEx Edge audio configured. And maybe we've got a couple remote users that are based in the UK. So in this particular case, we're dialing into it. So just like we talked about previously, signaling's in yellow, media in green. So in this particular case, everybody's dialing their local WebEx access number. So as you can see, each one dials the appropriate number for their region, and they all meet on the WebEx infrastructure itself. Pretty straightforward. Media goes, like we talked about, from device through the CNE to the internet to the WebEx meeting from both those in the US and Germany. For the UK, obviously, since they're not on net, they're going to go through the PSTN and then connect directly up into the WebEx infrastructure. Now let's take this one step further and say, okay, what if we want to dial back in the same scenario here? So instead of dial in, we're going to say, okay, call me back at my local number. So in this particular case, on the left-hand side, nothing's changed from an infrastructure perspective. We have WebEx Edge audio configured. We dial back, goes to Communications Manager, goes to Expressway C and E. Communications Manager gets signaling saying, yes, this number is on net. Send the media to the phone that's below. On the Germany side, very similar. We have the same type of IP phone on net, so in the headquarters, it'll route over to it. But also we have an external number, so 2 participants said dial back in this particular case. And the communication manager said, sure, I'm able to actually find this particular number, and I want to route it out based upon my policy out the PSTN gateway into the local office, outside the local office. Now, you could enter toll calls here, so there's a cost to the customer in this particular case if they allow this to happen. In addition, the same flow would happen to the UK user in the upper right, except this time WebEx would actually use its PSTN connectivity to call back into the phone that's in the UK versus the ones that were actually dialed directly over the internet to the US and into Germany. And then let's think about this from a global perspective. Maybe I've got a large organization and I've got like a centralized site, and I've got SME, which is the Session Manager Edition, set up with multiple different leaf clusters below. This is a fully supported solution. So this is a simple example showing you a single internet connection and one actual country. But as we know, and as UC partners, you guys know that it actually can be spread globally across every different country depending on what's involved in that customer's organization. Do they have one in Europe? Do they have one in Asia? Do they have one in the United States? Do they have one in Europe? So we could have different leaf clusters spread out, and the SME could actually route across it. This is a fully supported solution. We want to actually take the E164 information, basically the signal that comes forward, the call itself, send it to SME and make SME the decision factor on it. Where does it actually go from here? That's nothing to do with the WebEx Edge audio. SME, just like it normally does, will route the traffic across the actual network itself to find the end devices. So those are a couple simple examples of how you can use it from a dial-in and a dial-out perspective. Now remember, this is plus E164, so this is numeric dialing into the actual meetings or callback into the meetings themselves. Now I want to transition here a little bit and talk about WebEx Edge Connect. Remember, I said there's 3 components to the WebEx Edge umbrella services. WebEx Edge Audio, WebEx Edge Connect is the second one. So what is WebEx Edge Connect? So WebEx Edge Connect is basically a peering agreement that Cisco has with Equinix to provide a backbone infrastructure connection to our data centers, and also a direct peering link so that the customer can have a direct link into the WebEx data center. This provides obviously higher quality audio and video connections going directly from the customer prem into our WebEx data centers. Now you may be saying to yourself, where might these data centers be? So here's a quick look at how they actually are spread out across the globe and where they are. In this representation, the red dots are the Equinix Cloud Exchange locations. The icons represent the Cisco WebEx locations, and any of the ones in green represent co-locations where Cisco and Equinix are in the same facility. So from a customer requirement, what's required for them? So there's a couple different things. Number one, they have to have an agreement with Equinix for their Exchange product, and also they must have an agreement with Cisco to actually do the peering into it. In addition, the customer has to have an understanding of BGP routing. So what ends up happening here is you have to set a BGP route between the customer environment and the WebEx AS, and we need to make sure that it actually routes properly through the Exchange over into the WebEx data centers itself. Now, customers may not have this expertise. This is where you can come in and actually provide these services to make sure they have the proper BGP routing, and also how do they ingest those routes into their local routing protocol on their network and WAN itself. So if you look at this picture kind of a little bit differently here, what is the dividing lines between Cisco and Equinix from a support perspective and also an OSI layer perspective? So simply put, if you think about it, layer 1 and layer 2 are going to be provided by the Equinix Exchange. So they provide the physical and the data link layers. Anything from routing up to the application layers is a Cisco service itself. So if we don't have a link light, for example, in the actual router, then most likely we need to talk to Equinix as part of the problem. If we can't get the routes through, then we need to talk to Cisco about it. That's kind of the dividing line between the two different companies where they actually have their responsibilities in this particular integration. Now, as part of this infrastructure, we always recommend that you have dual connections to it. So Cisco has at least 2 different connections, primary and secondary connection, into its WebEx data centers with Equinix. We also recommend the same thing for customers. So they want to have a primary and a secondary connection into the Equinix Exchange. And if those happen to fail, then sure, they can use their existing internet connection to actually route, like it does today, out the internet into the WebEx data centers themselves to get the media connected. Now, with this being said, a customer does not have to actually do Equinix connectivity in all three regions. Let's say, for example, US, EMEA, or APAC. They can pick and choose based upon their internet connection where they want to connect into this exchange, into the data centers themselves. Now, a couple things to realize with this. So with the Webex Edge Connect integration, it's primarily about how do I actually get the media directly into the Webex data centers. So as part of this, there's a couple things you need to be aware of. Any media-related resource or stream that's going from the client to the meeting itself will cross the Equinix peering agreement into the data center. Now, signaling is a little different. Signaling for the Webex meetings application itself will use the same connection right into the data center itself. Now, signaling, let's say, for example, for the Teams clients, they still go out into the internet itself. So we need that internet connection as a requirement for the Teams signaling. But remember, all the media goes across the peering connection that we have between customer site and the Webex data center. In addition, any of the third-party analytics that we might use for the Teams client itself, such as Docker, Crash Analytics, and so on, go out the direct internet connection and do not flow across the peering connection that we have today. In addition, if you have a video mesh node, for example, in the customer environment, its cascade links will go across the peering connection also, does not go across the public internet. So I just mentioned Webex Edge Video Mesh. So if you're not familiar with this, let's take a kind of an overview of what this product does. It's the third component of the Webex Edge umbrella services. Remember, there was Webex Edge Audio we talked about, Webex Edge Connect, and Webex Edge Video Mesh. So Video Mesh primary purpose is actually to alleviate some of the bandwidth needed because all communications goes up to the cloud itself. What if I could take a percentage of that media, keep it local, similar to like a bridge on-premise, but yet this is really an extension of the cloud services, so it's the same cloud service we have put into a software package that the customer can load on their premise, and then basically process some of that media and only send the streams that are needed across the actual cascade from the on-premise environment to the cloud itself. So this particular product can actually be put in multiple different locations. It can be a single node, or it can be multiple nodes and are grouped together in clusters. It can be put inside the customer network, inside their existing data centers. You can have one or many clusters, depending on how your organization is set up, or you can actually have it inside of the DMZ based upon the security policy. So some customers don't want to actually allow traffic from the inside to flow directly out to the internet itself, so they want everything to land inside the DMZ, for example. Either one of these two is approved and valid solutions that you can actually deploy the video mesh node. So let's look at this diagram here. The blue on the right represents a corporate network. We've got a couple video mesh nodes installed. I have a meeting that happens, and first off, some of the Webex Teams devices and clients connect up to it. Then, also as part of the solution, any SIP video endpoint registered to communications manager or to the VCS or Expressway can also use the video mesh node. They would dial into the Webex meeting and it would land locally there. But what happens when it actually fills up? So obviously we have no more capacity, but video mesh node, remember I said, is an extension of the cloud resources. So if we run out of capacity, not a big deal. Unlike on-premise devices, we say, okay, let's overflow the remaining requests and send them out to the cloud and create a cascade link between the cloud and the on-premise video mesh node. So now we have a seamless meeting between any cloud components, which anybody that's connected to the cloud directly, as you can see on the left-hand side here, and the on-premise users that are between the network video mesh node and also the ones that have actually cascaded over. The user experience is exactly the same. They get to see all the participants that are valid for their particular device when connecting, and they're able to communicate sending audio, video, and content between all the participants. So I mentioned this integration with on-premise devices. So there's two ways you could do this. If you have an existing communications manager infrastructure, just like we talked about for Webex Edge, you can create a SIP trunk similar to what we did in Webex Edge Audio and connect it directly into the video mesh node so you can host any of those participants that are registered to communications manager. In addition, we could actually do the same thing for the Expressway registered devices. Create a neighbor zone, which is a similar concept to the SIP trunk to the video mesh node. So now when I dial 123 at sitename.webex.com. In either one of those two cases, whether it's a communications manager or VCS/Expressway, we can actually route that particular user that's on those devices as a call control across the neighbor zone or SIP trunk, have it land on the video mesh node, process its media, and then from there, if the video mesh node needs to communicate outside to the WebEx environment for external users, we can create that cascade. In addition, any of the cloud registered devices that are on-premise, for example here, this shows a rootkit and also a WebEx board, they would actually utilize the video mesh node themselves and keep all of its media local. In addition to that, inside the WebEx Control Hub, there's plenty of reporting that's available to you. You can also look at how many of these particular calls stayed on-prem, how many overflowed, how many were actually cloud only. In addition to what type of utilization do I have as relating to the actual amount of clusters, nodes in the cluster, what types of devices I've actually connected to it, whether it's desktop, mobile, telepresence type systems. In addition, there's also reports that show you what kind of cascade bandwidth am I using between the video mesh node or video mesh node cluster and the WebEx cloud itself. So all these are available to you inside the analytics portion of it. But you may be thinking to yourself, okay, you talked about their individual service. Can we start combining these two together? So let's start thinking about it. So we have audio and video. So one of the key differences here is to think about WebEx Edge Audio is I'm dialing a number, right? I'm dialing a number to connect into the bridge itself versus video mesh, I'm dialing a SIP URI. Can they be together? Sure. This infrastructure shows you in this diagram that you can have two separate SIP trunks coming from Communications Manager, one to route the audio, one to route the video traffic. Each one can meet on the actual Cisco WebEx meeting itself. So that's not a problem. Can I actually do all three together? Now this is kind of an eye chart on the left-hand side, but the answer is yes in shorthand. You could have all three. You could have WebEx Edge Audio, Video Mesh, and remember we have the Connect, which is a direct connection between the customer premise and also the WebEx cloud, primarily used for the meetings or the media traffic going across it to connect into the meetings. So sure, you could have the audio going through Expressway, and a hit the peering connection goes out directly into the meeting itself. In addition, Video Mesh has the video communications, specifically the media and the content, and we'll send that out the same connection over the Equinix exchange to our data center. So as you can see here, this is pretty complex. This is where your expertise as a UC partner comes in, where I can actually see video communications, Expressway, Video Mesh, also my understanding of WebEx. This is where the partners can add a lot of value to the customer because it gets very complex very quickly on how do I do dial plan, how do I do routing, make sure the proper queues are in place if I'm doing QoS on the LAN itself. These are value adds that you can have in this particular solution when deploying it in a customer environment. Now remember, like I said earlier, we do not have to have a reliance on any one of these three. This diagram shows you WebEx Edge Audio, WebEx Edge Video Mesh, and WebEx Edge Connect. You can have just one of those services, not a requirement to have any of the other ones with it. They're all standalone services themselves. So with that being said, I kind of referenced some material. There's deployment guides available if you want to get to more of the technical details around WebEx Edge Connect, WebEx Edge Audio, WebEx Edge Video Mesh. They're all on the Collaboration Help site. In addition, there's data sheets for each one of these particular products. And that's it. Thank you for your time.
Next, let's check your knowledge on something we have covered in this module. What are the three components of WebEx Edge? WebEx Audio, WebEx Teams, WebEx Events. WebEx Audio, WebEx Connect, WebEx Mesh. WebEx Connect, WebEx Mesh, WebEx Devices. The correct answer is B, WebEx Audio, WebEx Connect, and WebEx Mesh. In this section of the module, we covered an overview of WebEx Edge solution, the WebEx Edge Audio architecture, the WebEx Edge Connect architecture, the WebEx Edge Video architecture, and additional resources for WebEx Edge. Thanks for watching.